All right, ladies and gentlemen, Barry Bloom is a senior writer for Sportico who has been covering sports for quite some time now. All the experience and credibility that we need to finally and properly talk about baseball here on this show. Uh, um, credibility is, I mean, we have credibility in other things. I did go on a mile long rant about the Commanders winning the Super Bowl just a week ago before they sent me into misery yesterday. So we'll take credibility everywhere else we can get it. Thanks for joining today, Barry. How you doing?
Great, Reid. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So I know baseball is your passion. It's your main focus here, but I did want to get into an article that you worked on recently about the Phoenix Suns owner, Robert Sarver. Now, that is a topic we haven't gotten into yet on the show. We just keep it's missed us, but Suns owner Robert Sarver, to sum it up briefly, he was suspended for 1 year with a $10 million fine. Uh, I'll let you help explain what exactly happened there, but we've had backlash from stars in the NBA. We've had backlash from celebrities about it. And all of it, when looking at what happened leading up to it, seems quite light. Could you explain exactly what happened and went into the NBA's decision?
Well, I mean, I think if you read any of the report, there were over 300 people in the organization that talked to the NBA about this stuff that went on. And, Sarver's owned the team for 18 years. He didn't have much success with it until recently. About 5 years ago, he hired James Jones, who hired Monty Williams, and they separated out basketball operations from the business operations. And I think a lot of this goes back to previous coaches, previous administrations, previous people who worked for the organization. I think one of the reasons why the committee for the law firm that had analyzed this recommended what they did was that so much of these things, as atrocious as they may be, happened a long time ago. Didn't happen in the recent organization. And look, I talked in the last year since this went into investigation. I talked with Monty, I talked with Jones a lot about this, and they all had really good things to say about him. Now, I guess if you're underemployed to the guy, you're going to probably say good things about him. But I mean, they were stellar in terms of how he's been treated, how they've been treated, and they've been impeccable in the last 3 or 4 years in building a product that now is one of the best in Suns history. Although it's fallen short the last couple of years and didn't win the playoffs, didn't win the finals 2 years ago, got knocked out in the playoffs last year in a horrible Game 7 against the Mavericks. Uh, I mean that's kind of the overall thumbnail.
I feel it. And I mean, we've seen some backlash to it, but do you think that this will cause the Suns, or, I mean, Chris Paul is the head of the Players Association in the
Well,
NBA,
he wasn't it,
or was, yeah.
right?
And backlash coming from other players, backlash coming from different media outlets. Do you think there will be more to this case, or will the NBA just try to let this kind of push and fade away as other storylines take over?
Well, Sarver is he's the front man for an organization of a number of owners, and there's already been some backlash within the ownership group for him to resign. There's also been some challenges from sponsors to the Suns in the arena that if he comes back and takes over the team again, they will pull their sponsorships. I think there's a lot of things going on here. And if you're a free agent and if you have a long term contract, I mean, they just signed Booker long term, they signed Aiton long term, they've got Paul for at least 3 more years. None of these guys are going anywhere. They can make up a stink about it and ask to be traded, but it's not that easy, as you know, with salary cap restrictions and what you can do to get rid of people with those size contracts in the NBA. So I think, the players will have what they have to say. I think Paul has already made his statement. They have media day on Monday, a week from today. And I'm sure this is going to be the huge topic of conversation. And look, I wrote a story last year because I've been doing a lot of basketball and hockey Hockey's kind of my number 2 sport. I've always loved basketball. I did the Super Bowl this year, and I'm balancing it out in this job, just not doing baseball, though baseball during the summer is my main concern. But the point of the matter is, I was surprised that they were able to play above it last year with all the doubt in the organization and the COVID problems. And they set franchise records for consecutive wins in a row, franchise record for most wins by a Suns team. And, really, if I look back on it, very much, I was talking to Dave Roberts of the Dodgers about this the other day. The Suns really didn't have a meaningful game to play from December on. They just ran away with the West. And when the Warriors had their injuries, they collapsed. They weren't even an issue for the Suns, and they really weren't an issue for anybody else until everybody got back healthy in the playoffs. So the Suns really had a magnificent season, but they really weren't ready for the playoffs because they hadn't played a meaningful game. And New Orleans gave them everything they had for them to get through that series. And Dallas, really shook them. So, how they reconstitute this year with all of this now in the forefront, and the fact that, everybody's going to be talking about it everywhere they go. It's going to be a little bit different than last year when they were coming off a 6-game loss to Milwaukee in the finals, and they, had to basically carry the burden of the investigation on their shoulders all season. But there was no known yet. Now there's a known, and so they're going to have to deal with that, plus the fact that for 2 years in a row, in the biggest series of the season, they were up 2-0 after wins at home and lost the series. Yeah. So, there's a lot of pressure for the Suns this year.
It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds there. I'm going to switch gears now over to baseball. MLB, we're about to get right into the heat of playoff season. Some of the biggest news that's come for baseball, though, is about the future and the new rule changes that are being brought into baseball. And it's a lot that people have been asking for years. It's in part of the idea and the spirit of trying to shorten the game and bring in a younger audience, I guess, and bring in more audience in general. We've seen baseball kind of fall off a little bit in rating, not a little bit, but a lot in ratings to not only the juggernaut that is the NFL, but then the NBA creeping in there. We have a pitch clock that is finally going to be enacted. We have the idea of limiting the shift, not outright eliminating it, but just limiting it. And I've even heard larger bases, all of this to help, grow the game, strengthen the integrity, and just shorten it. I'd like your thoughts on everything that's going into these.
Well, actually, they are eliminating the shift. They're not limiting it. It's
just
over.
Outright. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I'm writing about that for tomorrow, where, the Dodgers think, they shift almost more than anybody in baseball. Mm-hmm. Something about, over 10,000 pitches they shifted on this year. They've got the lead, the most defensive runs, the lead allowed, in, basically in the league, or prevented in the league. And so, this is going to all change for them next year, where they're not going to be able to move players at will around both sides of the field. Now, I'm sure they will all devise ways of moving infielders around their own portions of the field, but you don't have the ability anymore to run a shortstop into short right field, or, move the third baseman over to the right side of the infield and then flip-flop him on the next pitch with the shortstop. That's not going to happen anymore. You have to play with both feet on the infield dirt. You have to be on either side of the infield. Two players have to be on either side of the infield. And that's going to change the whole dynamics of the game. Look, you're talking about, bringing some offense back into the game. When the shift started really in earnest in 2008, and it was courtesy of my old buddy Joe Madden and the Rays when they went to the World Series, they started shifting to get an edge against teams that were spending a lot more money to get to those places. And then the league started copycatting them and mimicking them. And so there is like over a couple of 100,000 shifts in baseball this year alone. Not one infielder who's in the game today has ever played the infield without a shift or the ability to play a shift. I go back, I've covered baseball. This is the end of my 46th season. So I go back to a time where really the only time you shifted was if Barry Bonds came up, Jim Thome came up, there was some potent power hitting left-handed hitter, and you wanted to stack the right side against him. And most of them, like Bonds, were good enough hitters that they just went the other way and thwarted the shift. In this era, they've broken it down to such a degree that they know exactly where every hitter's tendencies are. And so they just plug a guy up the middle because they know sooner or later that hitter is gonna smack the ball there. And what would be a line drive base hit to center becomes an out. That's all going to change. And I think that'll be great for the game.
That's what I know. It has been something people have been screaming for, that elimination of the shift. But do you think that it's actually going to be eliminated, or will teams that have been relying on it, like the Dodgers, still figure out ways to try and get it?
Excuse me.
Oh, of course.
There's not going to be any. You can figure out. I'm sure they will. Their analytics guys will devise a way of playing infield. So yeah, I think that the Dodgers, teams like the Dodgers, the Blue Jays, the Mets, teams that practice this, their analytics departments are going to figure out a way of being able to move infielders around within the realm of the new rules, but it's just not going to be as extreme as it was.
Right.
And you're going to have to leave, to open up or cover a spot, you're going to have to leave a big spot open against a pull hitter. So, I mean, somewhere in a normal infield, the hitter is going to be able to ground a ball into the outfield, which they haven't been able to do because these guys are not good enough hitters to be able to do that. If you were Tony Gwynn, if you were Ichiro, if you knew how to hit and go with the ball the other way, they couldn't do it. And that's basically what Rob Manfred said when he took over as commissioner. People asked him about this in the immediate blush of his commissionership, and he said he would watch it and see if hitters could adjust to it, and the hitters just could never adjust to it. And so you're looking at Major League Baseball has a 243 batting average right now. It's the lowest since they lowered the mound. It was 237 in 1968. The last drastic rule changes for offense was lowering the mound, shrinking the strike zone, and then a few years later adopting the designated hitter in the American League, which has now finally been memorialized in the National League forever too. So, and that only took, 40, 50 years. So, I mean, baseball's not quick at this, but I think with the pitch clock, I've seen a lot of this in the Arizona Fall League where they've experimented with it. The pitcher will just have to get the ball and throw it within 15 to 20 seconds. These 30 or 40-second gaps on the mound, especially as you get later into the game and a relief pitcher is taking time with runners on base, it's going to really help the pace of the game. I think there's, and I explain this all the time, I think there's one thing to understand about baseball that isn't true about some of the other sports. There's two issues here with baseball. I don't think anybody really cares about the length of game when you go to the ballpark. There's a lot of value-added entertainment there. baseball is the kind of game where you can take a pause, you can talk with your friends, you can grab a beer. If you miss an inning or two, who cares? There are just things to do, and you can leave whenever you want to leave. The problem here is baseball on television. It's a it's not a sequential game, which is the way it's shot on television, with camera angles shooting from one part of the field to another. And you're never going to be able to change that. Football, basketball, hockey, they're all linear. The camera pans up and down the field and it shows you the action, and it can zoom in, zoom out, but it's constantly showing you the action in a coherent form. In baseball, when you go to the game, you have a view of the entire field and ballpark, and you can watch what a right fielder is doing. You can watch what the third baseman is doing. On TV, you really can't even see the elements of an entire shift because the camera's on a center field shot of the pitcher throwing the ball. And then the hitter hits it. It goes to an infielder who picks it up sequentially, one after another. And so it's a very difficult game to piece together on television. And if it's not played with any sort of pace, people just turn it off. And that's what they're concerned about, because they survive on television contracts. The TV stations and cable networks survive on advertising revenue. And if you don't perpetuate that, then you're in trouble. And I think this is really what all these rules are going after, to make a better product on television.
That'll be a great key to survival for them, and it's going to be fun to see how it changes and how it affects the league as a whole. I want to get into just shoot around of different MLB headlines and thoughts here as we close out. Juan Soto and the Padres. It's something that's been near and dear to this show's heart, being we have quite a few Nats fans as a part of this show. It really hurt. And then seeing him go to the Padres, it was looking rough for a little bit, but I guess that could be, you can attest that to, change of scenery, brand new ballpark for him, getting chemistry with that team. It looked like things started to pick up this past weekend there. So I'm curious, what are the realistic hopes for that team going into the playoffs without Tatis Jr.? Can Soto lift them and keep them up?
Well, and I wrote about this at the time of the trade. I think their actual possibility of going anywhere in the playoffs with Tatis Jr., with Soto, without, were pretty minimal. Yeah. I mean, because of the new playoff format, they have, they're 21 games behind the Dodgers. They are, vying for one of two of the three wild card berths, and the Braves are 10 games ahead of them. So the number one playoff team is either going to be, or wild card team is either going to be the Mets or the Braves. If the Padres finish second, they have to go to Atlanta or New York and play a 3-game series on the road just to survive to get to the NLDS. If they finish third, then they're going to have to go to St. Louis, and they really don't have great history of winning in St. Louis during the playoffs. So to me, I think that the whole view of this, you really can't view the Soto trade. You really can't view, obviously, what's happening, what Tatis is going to have when he comes back, midway through or whenever he comes back next year. They've got good pitching. They've got a good manager. I mean, basically, they played a game against the Diamondbacks here on Thursday night that was god-awful, and Bob Melvin closed the door and just reamed into him. He said there were looks on guys' faces, their eyes were bugging out because they'd never seen a manager act like that to them. And certainly the previous two managers here or in San Diego, Jace Tingler, and, they weren't going to do that. So, I think that woke him up a little. Look, Soto, as you pointed out, after the Thursday night game, he fell to under 200 for the Padres with 3 homers and 7 RBIs.
Finally started to catch on a little bit.
Right.
Do you think Soto will stay in San Diego? Or can I
No.
have my dream scenario where he leaves for free agency and comes on
Well,
back to the Nationals after we can get the trade bait and
he's going to go back to the team that, gives him the most money.
yeah.
I mean, what did he turn down almost 400 million with the Nationals to begin with?
I believe he turned down 430. It was either
Yeah,
420 or 430. Yeah.
right. So he's banking on the fact that they're going to get more money in the open market when he goes through what he's going to go through and how he plays the next couple of years. I think the Padres understand that. I don't think they're going to be competitive for him at that point, but who knows? It depends on how they do. I think, like I was saying to you, the judgment of this is going to be next year when they start fresh. But I mean, these guys have lost 21 of their last 25 games to the Dodgers under a lot of different configurations with a lot of different players in the last 2 years. And until they learn how to beat the Dodgers, they're not going to go anywhere in that division, and they're going to wind up being a playoff team or a wild card team. And in this format, then you have to win a 3-game series, whether you're at home or on the road, and then your pitching is spent going into the next 2 rounds of the playoffs. It's just tough, until they beat the Dodgers. It doesn't matter, and they're going to have to learn how to do that.
I'll turn it over to St. Louis now and Albert Pujols. He's on his quest for 700. As of this recording, I believe he's at 698. Too shy now of getting there. Do you see him returning next season if he finishes shy this year just to get those 2 home runs and then maybe call it a career after getting them?
Well, he says he's not returning next year. You can only take him by his word. I can't imagine that if somehow he finished the season without getting it, he wouldn't come back to hit maybe one more home run. I also look at it and go, hey, he could play half a season next year and pass Ruth too. He's only 714. He's only 16 homers away from Ruth now.
Yep.
He's not going to catch Aaron or Bonds, but I never thought that he was going to, get to this point this year. I thought the COVID season and all his injuries had caught up with him and he was going to just fall short. But he's had a great run here. So who knows? Guys say what they're going to say. It wouldn't surprise me either way. But I do think that Pujols is going to hit those 2 home runs before the end of the season. What do they have? 18 games or 17 games left to play?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they're out on the West Coast here this week in San Diego and LA. So I think he could do it here this week.
Yeah. It would hurt to just cut it shy. It would hurt. I was honestly shocked here in the middle of the season just to see that he was back in St. Louis. That caught me by surprise, let alone that he was doing this well. Turning to the Mets, I want to bring up Jerry Seinfeld. Was Jerry Seinfeld, he went on a whole tangent about the Mets and the Timmy Trumpet stuff with Edwin Diaz, their star closer there. He said that, it's the end of their season when Timmy Trumpet came out there and performed it live and all that. Was he right? Because then they went on a little bit of a skid. It seemed like Seinfeld was right after that. I mean, it's impossible. It's beautiful viral success the Mets are getting, and it's awesome star turn from Edwin Diaz there. How good has this been for the Mets and the MLB as a whole when it comes to trying to look cool and viral and hip to everything?
Well, I think it's great. It goes back to what you and I were just talking about the entertainment value of the game. When you can do something like this and get people all excited about it, and it becomes a traditional, semi-traditional thing to do, it's always good for the game. I'm for a lot of let them flip the bats, let them, act out as they go around the bases.
Yeah.
It's a fun game. This stuff about showing up other players on the other team, that's got to end at some point. It's as far as they had a high and they beat the Dodgers 2 games in a row at home. and Timmy Trumpet played the trumpet during that series. Then, they were left with the rest of a schedule. And I'm from New York. I'm a Yankee fan. My brother is a Met fan. And we talked about it and looked at the schedule at that point, and I think it started with Washington, and it said we looked at it and said, Mets should be fine for the rest of the season, and then they came off the high of playing the Dodgers and just went into the tank against the Nationals, who were starting to play well. So I mean, you're at this time of year where when you're in a race for a division title or a playoff spot, every game's an important game. I just saw something about Seattle has the rest of their games are against teams with 350 winning percentages or something. And it's nice, but you still have to beat those teams.
Right. You
And
can't get
again,
relaxed.
right. And again, just like I was saying about the Suns and the Dodgers this year, who, clinched the division with 3 weeks to go. And then we'll have a week off going to the NLDS. It's like, what do you do in those 4 weeks to keep yourself sharp? You'll be healthy, but what is that going to mean when other teams have to play up against each other and they have to win every game to get up against you by the time they get to your series? So, it should be interesting. I think the Braves are a little short this year, but last year they were too. They came on really strong in the postseason. Nobody expected it. I think the Mets have, once you get Scherzer back, if he's healthy going into the postseason, I would match their starting rotation up against anybody. And if they win the division, they'll be all set to play whoever they're going to play in the first round with their 4 pitchers ready to go. And I don't even think the Dodgers have good enough starting pitching to beat either the Braves or the Mets this year. They could, but if I were, doing a pari-mutuel on it, I would pick both the Braves and the Mets over the Dodgers. I think when you can do a series where your first 2 guys are Scherzer and DeGrom, and then you fall off to, Bassett and Walker and Carrasco, there's no fall off. The Dodgers have half of their starting rotation is injured, and Kershaw playing at half mast, which is what he's been doing the last 2 years when he can pitch. To your point about the Yankees, I don't think the Yankees have that kind of pitching to match up against the Astros either. They've got like the Padres thing with the Dodgers. The Yankees have it with the Astros. They can't beat the Astros. So, now they put themselves in a situation where they're going to have to play 4 games in Houston again, which is awfully tough for them. So, we'll see. But, I mean, there are some predetermined things that happen in this sport. And most of the time, you can pretty well know that they're not going to go against the grain.
That's the fun of it, though, sometimes, especially getting to the playoffs. Once it gets into that playoff season, though, just weird stuff can take off. Like you said, the Braves last year and how just got hot at the perfect time to go ahead and clinch it. Just to close it out, we're getting towards that playoff time. What are you looking forward to the most with the playoffs? Who are you going to be watching the closest? Who do you think is going to take it? Because we're talking about the entertainment value for MLB, and I really could see baseball, Manfred rooting really hard for a New York LA World Series. I would like to see that.
I would like to see that. I'd like to see a Met Yankee World Series again. I think that would be a fun World Series, although it won't play as well around the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But, you look at the National League, there are 4 good teams: the Dodgers, the Mets, the Braves, and the Cardinals. The other 3 teams that are vying for the playoffs, the Padres, Philly, and Milwaukee. I've seen them all extensively in the last few weeks live. They all stink. They don't deserve to be in the playoffs. In the American League, I think you have, because of the American League East, Toronto's good. Tampa Bay's always good. The Yankees will probably, they'll hold on and they'll win their division. And then they're going to wind up playing one of those teams in the first round. And they're going to have to get through the first round, which they haven't done in the last couple of years, either the wild card game or the first round. So to answer your question, my dream thing would be, and best for baseball, is Yankees Astros in the ALCS, Dodgers Mets in the NLCS, and like you said, either or, it doesn't matter to me. Yankees Mets or Yankees Dodgers in the World Series. But unfortunately, the way things turn out, I think we're going to get a redo of the 2017 World Series with the Dodgers and the Astros. And that's not a bad thing, because I think Dusty will get his chance to finally win the World Series.
Mm-hmm. There's some good history there. There's great storylines. It'd be fun to see. We're going to be curious to watch it unfold and see how it goes. Barry Bloom, senior writer for Sportico, thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We got to have you back so we can, dive some more into this. And also, you said you got a, good old buddy, old friend, Joe Madden. If you want to give him a link to us, he can jump in the studio too.
Okay, I'll be glad to.
Yeah, bring him on.
Okay.
Barry
Thanks,
Bloom,
Reid.
for being here.
Next time, I'll try not to be hacking up a storm.
I'll try not to either. I've been turning down the mic. We're good.